My name is Robert Michael Harrison. I'm 92 years old, and in April of 1943, I climbed into the cockpit of an aircraft that every German pilot in Europe was laughing at. They called it the flying milk bottle, the pregnant cow. Some of them, the ones with a sense of humor about killing, called it the fat American target. I was 21 years old, fresh out of training, and I was about to fly what would become the most feared fighter aircraft in the European theater. But that April morning, over the fields of occupied France, with my hands shaking on the control column and my wingman's voice crackling through the radio about bandits at 12 o'clock high, all I could think was, they're right. This thing flies like a truck. I'm telling you this now because I don't have much time left, and there's something about that experience, about being laughed at, about being underestimated, about proving everyone wrong, not through words, but through action, that I think people need to hear, especially now. Especially when it feels like the world is full of people telling you you're not good enough, you're too heavy, too slow, too old, too anything. Let me take you back to November 1942, Bridgeport, Connecticut. I just finished basic flight training, and they marched us out to the flight line to show us our new aircraft. I'll never forget the moment I first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt. It was the biggest single-engine fighter any of us had ever seen. This massive barrel-shaped fuselage with a propeller that looked like it belonged on a bomber. The other guys in my squadron, we just stood there staring. Someone behind me, I think it was Johnny Peters, he died over Hamburg in '44. He whispered, "They've got to be kidding." But they weren't kidding. This was our mount. This was what we were supposed to take into combat against the Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, the sleek, nimble German fighters that had been killing Allied pilots for 3 years. The instructor, a guy named Major Zemke, Hub Zemke, he walked along the line of us, and he could see it on our faces. The doubt, the fear. He stopped in front of me, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "This aircraft will save your life. Learn to fly it right, and you'll come home. Fly it like a Spitfire, and you'll die." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. The training killed more of us than the Germans did in those first months. The P-47 was unforgiving. It weighed 4 tons, loaded. 4 tons. The engine alone was bigger than anything we'd trained on. When you pushed the throttle forward on takeoff, the torque from that massive propeller would try to flip you over if you weren't ready. We lost 6 guys in my training group before we ever left Connecticut. Ground loops, torque rolls, one guy just froze during a high-speed dive and flew straight into the ground. His aircraft, they told us, hit at over 500 miles per hour. There was nothing left to bury. But here's the thing nobody tells you about fear. You can't sustain it. You can't live in that state of panic for months on end. Eventually, you either quit or you adapt. I adapted. I spent every spare moment studying that aircraft. I memorized the technical manual cover to cover. I learned every system, every limitation, every strength. And slowly, very slowly, I started to understand what Major Zemke meant. The P-47 wasn't trying to be a European fighter. It was something else entirely. It was a weapon built around American industrial logic. Overwhelming power, unmatched firepower, survivability through sheer brute strength. By March 1943, I'd logged 75 hours in the Thunderbolt. I'd practiced gunnery, formation flying, high-altitude intercepts. I'd fired at towed targets and watched my bullets, 8 streams of .50 caliber death, converge at 300 yards into a zone of destruction about 6 feet across. Anything in that zone, they told us, would cease to exist. I believed them. What I didn't believe was that I'd live long enough to use it in combat. We shipped out to England in early April 1943. The 61st Fighter Squadron, part of the 56th Fighter Group. They stationed us at Horsham St. Faith, this muddy airfield in East Anglia, where the rain never stopped and the cold cut through your flight suit like a knife. The RAF Spitfire pilots on the neighboring base, they'd come over to our mess hall sometimes, and they'd look at our P-47s sitting on the hard stands, these massive shapes in the fog, and you could see it in their faces. Pity. One RAF squadron leader, I remember his name was Barkley. He had 3 kills painted on his Spitfire. He sat down with us one night in the pub. He'd had a few drinks, and he got emotional. He looked at me, and he said, "Son, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry they're sending you up in those things." I asked him what he meant. He said, "The 109s will climb above you. The 190s will turn inside you. And when you try to fight back, they'll dance around you like you're standing still. A fighter needs to be light, nimble, quick. That," he pointed out the window toward our flight line, "that's a flying coffin." I wanted to argue with him, but the truth is, I was terrified he was right. Our first mission was April 8, 1943. The briefing was simple. Escort B-17s to their target. Keep the German fighters off them. Bring everyone home. Simple. Except nothing about flying into enemy territory for the first time is simple. I remember every detail of that morning. The smell of coffee and cigarette smoke in the briefing room. The way my hands shook when I strapped into the cockpit. The weight of the parachute on my back. The sound of 16 P-47s starting their engines. This thunderous roar that made the ground shake. We took off at 0800 hours. 16 aircraft in tight formation, climbing toward our patrol altitude of 27,000 feet. At that altitude, the air is so thin, you need oxygen constantly. The cold is beyond anything you can imagine. 50 degrees below zero. Your canopy frosts over. Your fingers go numb, even in heated gloves. And the P-47, heavy as it was, climbed like it was grudgingly accepting the necessity of altitude. That's when we saw them. German fighters, at least 20 of them, circling at 30,000 feet, like wolves watching sheep. Major Blakesley, our squadron commander, he came over the radio, calm as anything. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, tally-ho," and then they dove on us. Here's what nobody tells you about combat. It's not noble. It's not heroic. It's not like the movies. It's terror and confusion and things happening so fast your conscious mind can't keep up. The German fighters came down on us like hammers from heaven, and in the first 10 seconds, we lost 2 aircraft, just gone. One moment they were on my wing, the next moment there was just empty sky and 2 parachutes floating down toward France. I yanked my stick hard left, trying to turn into the attack, and immediately I understood what the RAF pilot meant. The P-47 didn't turn. It wallowed. It felt like trying to throw a truck around a corner. The Focke-Wulf that had bounced us blew past, and I could see the pilot, clear as day. Young guy, blonde, and he was laughing. Actually, laughing. He came around for another pass, and I knew I was dead. I had no speed, no altitude advantage, and my aircraft handled like a drunk elephant. But then something happened that changed everything. Another P-47, flown by a guy named Walker Mahurin. He'd been flying above us, must have had an extra 1,000 feet of altitude. He rolled inverted and dove. I've never seen anything accelerate like that. The Thunderbolt, that fat, ugly truck-like machine, it fell out of the sky like a meteor. Within seconds, Mahurin was doing over 500 miles per hour. The Focke-Wulf pilot never saw him. Mahurin opened fire at 400 yards. 8 50 caliber machine guns. I was close enough to hear it, even over my own engine. It didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like tearing cloth, amplified 1,000 times. Industrial sound, mechanical, final. The German fighter, it didn't just get hit. It came apart. The wings separated from the fuselage. The tail broke off. The cockpit section just disintegrated into a cloud of aluminum fragments and smoke. The whole thing, from the moment Mahurin opened fire to the moment there was nothing left but falling debris. Maybe 2 seconds. Maybe. The blonde pilot who'd been laughing, I never saw a parachute. Mahurin's voice came over the radio, still calm. Scratch one bandit. Use your speed, boys. Don't try to turn with them. Dive and extend. That's when I understood. This aircraft wasn't designed to fight the way European fighters fought. It was designed to fight the American way. Use superior power. Use overwhelming firepower. Use mass and momentum as weapons. The rest of that mission was chaos. We lost 4 aircraft total, shot down 3 Germans. By any measure, it was a disaster. But I came home. My aircraft, which had taken several hits from German machine guns, brought me home. The engine never faltered. The controls never failed. The armor plate behind my seat had 2 bullet marks on it, impacts that would have killed me in a lighter fighter. That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that German fighter disintegrating, kept hearing that sound, that terrible industrial sound of 8 synchronized machine guns firing as one. The next morning at breakfast, nobody talked much. We were all processing what we'd experienced. But there was something new in the atmosphere. Not confidence, not yet, but possibility. Maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. Music. Over the next 3 months, I flew 47 missions. I watched the Luftwaffe's attitude toward us change in real time. In April, they were aggressive, confident, almost playful. By May, they were cautious. By June, they were desperate. And by July, they were terrified. The transformation happened because we learned how to fight our fight, not theirs. We stopped trying to turn with the Messerschmitts. Instead, we'd climb to 30,000 feet or higher, above where German fighters could effectively operate. Our turbo-supercharged engines gave us full power at altitudes where the Luftwaffe was gasping for air. Then we'd wait, patient, predatory. When German fighters appeared below us, attacking our bombers, we'd roll over and dive. The P-47 in a dive was the fastest thing in the sky. Nothing could catch us. Nothing could outrun us. We'd scream down from altitude, build up tremendous speed, and open fire while the Germans were fixated on the bombers. Our guns, those 850 calibers that the British had dismissed as inadequate, they were perfect. Cannon shells were devastating if they hit, but they had limited ammunition, 120 rounds maybe. Our machine guns, carrying 3,400 rounds total. We could fire for 30 seconds continuously. In combat, that's an eternity. And the effect? My God, the effect. I saw a Messerschmitt 110, a twin-engine heavy fighter, get caught in concentrated fire from a P-47. The aircraft literally cut in half. The wings folded up, the fuselage broke in the middle, and it just ceased to be an aircraft. It became junk, falling to earth. German pilots started calling our fire the American piano because of the sound. 8 guns firing, each with a slightly different rate, created this rolling thunder of impacts. Once you heard it, you never forgot it. I got my first kill on June 26, 1943. A Focke-Wulf 190 that made the mistake of flying straight and level below me. I dove from 28,000 feet, built up speed, positioned myself at his 6 o'clock, 300 yards out. My gun sight, a simple circle with a dot in the center, settled on his cockpit. I pressed the trigger. The P-47 shook. The nose dipped from the recoil. Smoke filled the cockpit from the gun gas venting system. And the German fighter just exploded. One moment it was an aircraft. The next moment it was an expanding ball of fire and smoke. The pilot never knew what hit him. I felt nothing. No triumph, no regret. Just a kind of numb acceptance. This was my job now. This was what I did. My second kill came 10 minutes later in the same mission. Then, a third. By the time we landed back at Horsham St. Faith, I was celebrating with the ground crew, but that night I threw up behind my revetment. Nobody saw, nobody knew. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe's entire tactical doctrine had changed. They stopped engaging us directly. They'd try to slip past our escorts to hit the bombers, then run before we could react. But the P-47 had evolved. New propellers, paddle blade props with massive 13-foot diameters improved our climb rate dramatically. Suddenly, we could go up with the Messerschmitts. We could chase them into the vertical, and when they tried to dive away, we'd follow them down, our mass and power giving us acceleration they couldn't match. I watched German pilots make mistakes, born of desperation. Veterans with hundreds of combat missions would try maneuvers that made no sense, tactics that worked against Spitfires but were suicide against Thunderbolts. By October, I'd flown over 100 combat missions. I had 8 confirmed kills and probably a half dozen more that were never verified. I'd been shot up 3 times, badly enough that I barely made it home. And I'd watched 23 pilots from my original squadron die. New guys came in constantly, kids even younger than I'd been, and we'd train them fast, fly them hard, and try to keep them alive. Most didn't make it past their 5th mission. But here's the thing. For every American pilot we lost, the Luftwaffe was losing 3 or 4, and they couldn't replace them. Germany didn't have the fuel for training, didn't have the time, didn't have the industrial capacity. By late 1943, German fighter pilots were entering combat with 60 hours of flight time. I had over 400 hours just in the P-47. It wasn't a fair fight. It was systematic destruction. Music. The mission I remember most clearly, the one that still wakes me up sometimes 80 years later, happened on March 6, 1944. We were escorting B-17s deep into Germany, near Brunswick. The Luftwaffe, they must have been desperate. They threw everything at us. Over 200 fighters, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even some Me-110s with rockets. The sky was filled with aircraft, contrails, smoke, tracer fire. It was hell at 26,000 feet. I was leading a flight of 4 Thunderbolts, positioned above the bomber stream. We saw a formation of about 30 German fighters setting up for a head-on attack against the B-17s. Standard tactic. They'd fire their rockets and cannon from long range, trying to break up the bomber formation. If they succeeded, our boys would die. Hundreds of them. I looked at my fuel gauge. We had maybe 20 minutes before we have to turn back. I looked at those German fighters lining up their attack run, and I made a decision. I rolled inverted and pushed the stick forward. My 3 wingmen followed without hesitation. We dove at full throttle, water injection engaged, pushing our aircraft to their absolute limits. The airspeed indicator needle went past the red line, 450 miles per hour, 500, 520. The controls got stiff, the whole aircraft shook, but she held together. American engineering, overbuilt for exactly this kind of abuse. We hit the German formation from above and behind, while they were fixated on the bombers. They never saw us coming. I selected the lead aircraft, a Messerschmitt 110, and opened fire at 400 yards. Walked the tracers right into him. The 110 exploded so violently I had to jink hard right to avoid the debris. My wingmen were firing. The German formation scattered in panic. Aircraft were falling, burning, spinning. In 30 seconds, we destroyed or damaged at least a dozen German fighters. The bomber attack never materialized. But here's the part that haunts me. As I pulled up from that attack, low on ammunition and fuel, I looked down and saw parachutes, maybe 8 of them. German pilots who'd bailed out, floating down toward their own territory. They'd survive. They'd fly again. And in that moment, I understood we weren't fighting battles. We were grinding through a generation. By June 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe was a broken force, wheel in the sky. On June 6th, I flew 3 missions over the beaches. We saw maybe a dozen German aircraft the entire day. After D-Day, our mission changed. Instead of just escorting bombers and fighting German fighters, we started ground attack work. The P-47, it turned out, was even better at killing tanks and trucks and trains than it was at killing aircraft. We carried bombs, 2,000 pounds of high explosives. We carried rockets, 10 of them, each equivalent to an artillery shell. And of course, we still had those 850 caliber guns. I strafed a German column near Falaise in August 1944. 50 trucks, supply vehicles, moving supplies to the front. We hit them with 4 P-47s, 2 passes each. When we were done, every single vehicle was burning. You could see the smoke from 20 miles away. The men in those trucks, probably support troops, cooks, mechanics, drivers. That night, I wrote a letter to my mother. I didn't tell her what I'd done. I just said I was healthy, the weather was nice, and I missed home. What else could I say? I flew my last combat mission on April 21st, 1945. By then, the war was nearly over. German resistance was collapsing. We were flying missions where we'd see no enemy aircraft at all, just empty skies and burning cities below. That final mission, we were supposed to strafe an airfield near Munich. But when we got there, it was abandoned. Aircraft parked on the hard stands, but no movement, no anti-aircraft fire, nothing. We circled for a few minutes, then headed home. On the way back, I saw it. Germany, laid out below me. Cities in ruins, roads packed with refugees, smoke columns rising from 1,000 fires. The landscape of total defeat. And I thought about that German pilot, the blonde kid who'd laughed at me on my first mission back in April 1943. I'd never learned his name, never knew if he survived the war, but I remembered his laughter, that confidence, that certainty that his nimble fighter would always beat our fat American Thunderbolts. He'd been wrong. Not because the P-47 was a better dogfighter, it wasn't, but because war isn't decided by dogfights. It's decided by production capacity, resource availability, and willingness to commit to total industrial warfare. America built 15,683 P-47s. Germany, by the end, was running out of everything: fuel, ammunition, pilots, time. We didn't outfight them. We buried them under an avalanche of steel and lead. I came home in June 1945, discharged as a captain with a Distinguished Flying Cross, an air medal with 15 oak leaf clusters, and 16 confirmed kills. They held a parade in my hometown. People called me a hero. Newspapers interviewed me. I shook hands with the mayor, and inside, I felt nothing. Empty, used up. For 50 years, I didn't talk about the war. Not to my wife, God rest her soul. Not to my children. Not to anyone. During those years, I read everything I could find, trying to understand what I'd been part of. But now, I'm 92 years old. I've outlived most of my squadron. I've outlived the German pilots I fought against. I've outlived most of the people who remember that war firsthand. And I realize I have a responsibility to tell the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the heroic myth, the truth. Here's what I want you to understand. The P-47 Thunderbolt was an extraordinary machine. Powerful, durable, deadly effective. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It allowed American pilots with average skills and training to defeat German pilots with superior experience. It survived damage that would destroy any other fighter. Its guns could erase an aircraft from the sky in seconds. It was a triumph of engineering and industrial might. But it was also a weapon. And those of us who flew it, we became very efficient at what weapons do. The Germans laughed at us when we arrived. They called our aircraft flying milk bottles and pregnant cows. They thought We didn't understand fighter design. They were right. We didn't understand European fighter design, but we understood American design. Overwhelming firepower, unmatched durability, industrial scale production. And within 18 months, we'd transformed the Luftwaffe's laughter into terror. By 1944, German pilots would break off attacks and run when they saw P-47s. The sound of our guns, that mechanical thunder, became the most feared sound in their sky. We didn't just defeat them. We systematically destroyed them, shot them down, strafed them on the ground, eliminated them in such numbers that by war's end, they had no one left who could fly effectively. So why am I telling you this? Why am I sharing this now, at the end of my life? Because I see people today, especially young people, who feel powerless, who feel like they're being laughed at, underestimated, dismissed, who feel like the odds are stacked against them. And I want you to know something. Being underestimated is a gift. When the Germans laughed at our Thunderbolts, they stopped taking us seriously. They stopped adapting their tactics. They assumed their superior experience and nimble fighters would always win. That assumption killed them. When people underestimate you, they're giving you an advantage. They're not preparing for what you're capable of. They're not taking you seriously. And when you finally show them what you can do, when you finally prove yourself, the impact is devastating. But here's the crucial part. Proving yourself, succeeding against the odds, winning when everyone expects you to lose. That's just the beginning. Because then you have to live with what you did to win. You have to carry the weight of your actions. You have to look in the mirror and accept what you've become. The P-47 taught me that overwhelming force wins wars. But it also taught me that winning comes with a cost that never appears on any balance sheet. I'm 92 years old, and I still hear those guns sometimes when I'm falling asleep. I still see aircraft disintegrating. I still count parachutes. Success, real success, the kind where you overcome impossible odds and prove everyone wrong, it changes you. It makes you powerful, but it also marks you, scars you, leaves you with memories and questions that never really go away. So yes, be the P-47 in a world that expects Spitfires. Use your unique strengths. Don't try to be what others think you should be. Find your own way to fight. But remember that power is a responsibility, not just a prize. Winning is necessary sometimes, but it's never clean. It's never simple. And the cost is always higher than you expect. I've lived 92 years. I flew one of the most feared fighter aircraft in history. I was laughed at, then feared. I won, but I paid a price for that victory that I'm still paying. And I'm telling you this now because time is short. Memories are fading, and someone needs to tell the truth. The Germans laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt. They stopped laughing when 850 caliber machine guns rained lead on them. But neither they nor we truly won. We just survived. I survived. I'm grateful for that. But I'm not proud. Survival isn't heroism. It's just luck and circumstance. What I am is a witness. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep witnessing. If this story means something to you, if it helps you understand something about being underestimated or the real cost of proving yourself, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it. That's all I ask. Take care of each other. Remember that the world needs people who can fight when necessary, but who never forget the cost of fighting. The P-47 was a magnificent weapon, but weapons, no matter how magnificent, exist to destroy. Never forget that. Never celebrate that. And never ever take it lightly when someone gives you power, whether literally or figuratively. Use your power wisely. Fight when you must, but carry the weight of what fighting costs. That's the lesson. That's what 92 years of living with those 850 caliber guns has taught me. I hope you never have to learn it the way I did.